right, so we will get started with the next presentation, one of our two more research-focused Capstone projects, and this time from Zach Lien. His Capstone project has to do with apostates. Good luck, Zach.
Okay. Well, today overall I'm going to be talking with you about difference and how we treat it. Now, it seems natural that we approach difference with hesitation and sometimes fear, and that's actually shown up in some of our presentations, whether that is difference of nationality or even difference of mental health. And there are people who face consequences because they are different. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about people who face consequences not because they are different, but because they choose difference. Because if there's something scarier than someone who is simply different than you and their different way of life is all they've ever known, it's someone who knows your way of life yet chooses something else. Not someone who looks different and comes from a different place, but someone who, despite his or her complete understanding of your way of life, chooses something completely different. And when the stakes are raised to choosing difference of religious belief, you see one of the deepest senses of human devotion combined with one of the deepest senses of fear, a concoction that can be deadly. So today I'm going to be talking about apostasy, the act of leaving one's religion, and apostates, those who leave their religion. In the United States, apostasy is not really a part of our public dialogue. In fact, most people don't even know what apostasy is or what it means. As for myself, I am very deeply familiar with what it is and what it means. I am an apostate of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or what is known by most as the Mormon Church. In fact, I was a sixth-generation Mormon. My ancestors have been in the church since Brigham Young was the prophet. And you can see that in all of its glory in this childhood picture of me from when I was younger, about to go off to church. You see, I was indoctrinated not just into the beliefs of the church, but also the expectations that the church had for me, and most important, I was indoctrinated into the idea of what would happen to me if I did not meet those expectations. Without a doubt, my apostasy from the LDS Church was emotionally and mentally the most difficult thing that I've ever done in my life. Not only because I had to disavow what I considered to be the only truth that really existed, but also I knew the social repercussions that I was going to incur from my family and from my friends. Now, I could go on to explain, but someone I know has a much better analogy. An apostate of Hasidic Judaism by the name of Shalom Dean has this excellent analogy for this extremely unique and incredibly troubling experience. Now, to paraphrase, losing your faith is not like realizing that you got an arithmetic problem wrong. It's more like realizing that your entire mathematical system as you know it is flawed, that every single calculation that you've ever made in your entire life was wrong. Your bank balance is off. Your life savings is gone. Your business is in the red when you imagine it to be flourishing, but weirdly enough, you seem to be the only one who realizes it. But how can that be possible? Is every single person crazy? Could you really be the only sane one? And if everyone in this world goes by this flawed system, doesn't it in some odd way make the wrong way right? Because at least there's consistency. They're in sync while you walk all alone. Sorry, just a second. And you know that you were right and that you can demonstrate that mathematical proof if given the chance, but unfortunately, they will not give you that chance. In fact, as my presentation will explain, some are so unwilling to give you that chance that they are willing to use state power to lash you, to imprison you, and in the worst of cases, to kill you. Unbeknownst to most people, there are 20 countries in the world that criminalize apostasy, all of them Islamic, and there are 8 countries that explicitly identify apostasy as a capital offense. And though capital punishment has become more rare, lashings, imprisonment, loss of citizenship, loss of marriage, and loss of inheritance are all repercussions that people face from the governments alone. Extrajudicial punishments, such as social exile and killings, also persist. And this comes from the sentiment of Islamic law, which is based on certain verses in the Quran, as well as what are called hadiths, which are the words and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. So this disdain for apostates, as well as the desire to punish them, it's not just found in radicals, but also your government leaders, your local religious leaders, and sometimes your random citizens. In 2013, Pew Research Center on Religion and Public Life collected data in Islamic countries on the support for making Sharia law the law of the land, as well as the favorability for establishing a death penalty for apostates, and the results were alarming. Now on the left, the graph shows the support for making Sharia law the law of the land, and on the right, is the graph showing the favorability for the death penalty for apostates. Now let's look to a specific example. We're going to look at Egypt. Now in Egypt, 74% of Muslims favor making Islamic law, or Sharia law, the official law of their country. And on the right, among Muslims who say Sharia should be the law of the land, 86% of those Egyptians favor the death penalty for converts. That means approximately 63% of all Muslim Egyptians support the death penalty for apostates under Sharia law. But there is reason to believe that we should be more than 63% worried. And that's because this does not include those who don't support Sharia law but would support extrajudicial killings. It doesn't support those who want Sharia law but would prefer other punishments such as loss of inheritance, imprisonment, or lashings. Additionally, this research did not include 7 of the 8 countries that explicitly identify apostasy as a capital offense. Afghanistan was the only country from that research that was represented, and not surprising, Afghanistan had the highest support for the death penalty for apostates, with 75% of all Afghani Muslims supporting the death penalty for apostates under Sharia law. Finally, this research does not address blasphemy laws. Blasphemy laws are laws that hinder freedom of expression with regards to criticism of religion, religious texts, religious practices, and beliefs. And blasphemy laws are actually much more common than apostasy laws. These punishments are typically less severe, but they sometimes can be just as severe. And I want to quickly tell the story of Salman Taseer. Salman Taseer is the former governor of the largest province in Pakistan, and before then he was a well-respected businessman in the country. Now, Salman Taseer in 2011 came out in opposition to Pakistan's blasphemy law, an extremely unpopular opinion that led to him receiving many death threats. And it wasn't a few months later that Salman Taseer's own security guard, Mumtaz Qadri, opened fire on him at a local market, hitting him 26 times and killing him. Now this event, as well as subsequent events, led to massive protests around the country. But unfortunately, those protests are not what you think that they were. It was the conviction of Qadri, not the assassination of Taseer, that led to those protests. On February 29, 2016, Mumtaz Qadri was hanged for the murder of Governor Salman Taseer. This is a photo of the assassin Mumtaz Qadri's funeral in Pakistan, with over 100,000 Pakistani Muslims attending his funeral in support, throwing flowers on the van that carried his body. In attendance also was arguably Pakistan's most influential religious leader, and soon thereafter, a mosque in the capital of Pakistan was named after Qadri. This is the sentiment of apostasy and blasphemy laws that I've been researching, that I've been focusing on, and that I've been trying to combat. So in summary, apostates in Islamic countries face consequences from the government and the society, ranging from the dehumanizing to the fatal. And opposition, assuming it still lives, has an extremely difficult time having any impact whatsoever. And with this foundation, I want to go into the motivations, intentions, and plans behind my own capstone. Now, my primary motivation is, of course, to protect and empower apostates in Islamic countries. And I'm very fortunate in that I'm not the only one who has this motivation. Other apostates of many religions, especially those in the ex-Muslim community that I'm close to, as well as numerous secular humanist organizations, and sometimes some Christian organizations, join in this effort, and that gives me hope. And with this motivation, I intend on overcoming 2 main obstacles. The first is the public's lack of knowledge and awareness of what apostasy actually is. So now, be honest. Before talking to me or hearing from me, whether it was today or 6 weeks ago, how many of you knew what apostasy was? Raise your hand. Okay, so we got several hands. Now, out of the ones who have their hands up, how many of you knew that apostasy laws existed? Okay, a couple hands. Unfortunately, those aren't good odds if I want to raise public awareness, raise funds, or make partnerships to combat this issue. The other obstacle that I have to overcome is actually lack of research within academia, because there is a serious lack of research into the repercussions that apostates face. We don't have academia coming out with what could be catchy statistics, I guess, for the public to get concerned and incite that concern to get involved. So I guess my overall intention is to raise understanding and concern of apostates in academic and public spheres. And I have 2 umbrella plans in order to fulfill this intention. Now, the first is simply advance and improve research. And the first portion of that is qualitative research, which is what I've been doing for the past year and what I've been focusing on over this fellowship in the last 6 weeks. Over the past year, I've conducted a comparative analysis on the 20 countries that maintain blasphemy laws, as well as a comparative analysis between the status quo and alternatives to the status quo. When I originally wrote my policy paper on the repercussions that apostates face, I had to provide 3 alternatives that sought to solve the issue. And while I've been here during the 6 weeks, I've been able to evaluate the viability of some of those alternatives. Some of them I've been able to gain more support, and others I've had to lay by the wayside. And more important, with my mentor and with his colleagues, I've been able to learn about alternatives that I had never even thought of before, which is very nice. Unfortunately, there's a large room for improvement in quantitative research, both in my own research as well as general academia, because there is little or no research that exists on the rate of apostasy in these countries, especially how it relates to the laws that exist in those specific countries. There's little or no research on the rate at which governments prosecute apostates after they've been identified, and finally, there's little or no research on the frequency of extrajudicial killings within these countries afterwards. Now, my last area of research that I want to do is something that I started doing a couple months ago. But essentially, I want to complete a case study on Tunisia. And Tunisia is actually a very unique country because it abolished its quite fierce apostasy law just a couple of years ago during its Jasmine Revolution. And it is right now the only country that explicitly outlaws the extrajudicial killings of apostates. And the impact that law has on the sentiment of apostates will become more clear in the upcoming years, and I want to be in the forefront of that research. Now, in conjunction with the research, I do have a public awareness campaign that I'm calling We Are Apostates, and I have purchased the domain name for weareapostates.com. And I have initial goals as well as future goals. The initial goal is simply to just raise the general understanding of apostasy as well as the obstacles that apostates have to overcome. And the way I want to do that is to share the stories of apostates from around the world from various religions, reaching out to my ex-Muslim, ex-Mormon, ex-Jehovah's Witness, and ex-Scientologist friends so they can share their stories in a fashion similar to Humans of New York. And hopefully those stories, and I can tell you I've heard many of them, those stories will incite that concern. They have that potential. And then eventually what I want We Are Apostates to do is to transition into a public campaign that has social activism in order to actually combat apostasy laws. Now, when it comes to the short or long-term goals of this, I think that they're fairly clear. The short-term goals of my capstone are simply to publish my qualitative research that I've been doing over the past year and gain that credibility. Second, I want to build and promote weareapostates.com. And finally, I want to begin my case study on Tunisia. As for long-term goals, I have 3 primary ones. The first is, after building this credibility, to create a partnership with an organization that could help me advance quantitative research. This could be a governmental institution like the United States Center for International Religious Freedom, which my mentor has so graciously helped me build ties with, or with a nonprofit such as Pew Research. The second goal is to transition We Are Apostates into that website with the emphasis of social activism to combat apostasy laws. But finally, I want to include that campaign to also combat blasphemy laws, which can be much more problematic because Islamic countries are not the only countries that maintain blasphemy laws. In fact, there are 9 countries in the European Union, including Germany and Greece, that maintain blasphemy laws, ostensibly in order to decrease social hostilities of religion. So combating blasphemy laws could in turn lose allies in the fight to combat apostasy laws. Now, it's very clear that I have some extremely lofty goals with this capstone, but I promise you, more lofty is my vision. Apostates are possibly the most hated group in possibly the most violent and volatile region of the world. Right here on this slide are 4 of possibly the most famous and ardent victims of apostasy and blasphemy laws. 3 of them were charged with apostasy. 2 of them have been sentenced to death. And you already know the story of Salman Taseer in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, I envision a future where a coalition of peoples, organizations, and countries can apply pressure in order to abolish apostasy and blasphemy laws. Abolishing apostasy laws means that difference may just be able to exist. And abolishing blasphemy laws means that difference may just be able to speak freely. Now, the idealist in me sees apostates as people being very familiar with the religion and the culture, and I believe that they can begin a dialogue on reform in that religion and in that culture and set the stage for an expansion on human rights that Western countries and organizations are simply not capable of doing. Now, that's a lot of faith to put in apostates of all people, but I can personally attest to the unparalleled resilience that these people have, the people that I've come to know and love and call my family. Mentally, these people have gone to hell and back, and I believe they are the key to advancing human rights in the region. And I'll be measuring my success through all of these small steps that I have mentioned on this long journey of choosing to make a difference. Thank you very much. Yes, Doug?
So you're a non-Muslim white Western
Yes.
criticizing other countries and cultures, which is right now in the academic culture in America is seen as imperialism,
Mm-hmm.
misogyny.
Mm-hmm.
How do you compete against that sort of, that sort of prejudice against your, against your passion, against your vision that you're encountered even in the West,
Absolutely.
let alone in those
Mhm.
those countries in the Middle East?
I would be fooled to not include the ex-Muslim connections that I have. And honestly, when I bring them into this project, my goal isn't to lead ex-Muslims into this project. It's to empower them to hopefully lead this project. As someone who's familiar much more with Mormonism and the ex-Mormon community, I would be someone who would lead that effort. But I want to partner with people, not to be in charge of people when it comes to the other campaigns and the other groups. Allowing them to have that stage, hopefully I have the ability to empower them through some of the research that I collect and publish. Yes.
So, I guess, being very rephrased, what is the results of the research? What kind of tests goes back?
Mhm. Well, when it comes to going through each of the individual, essentially like the laws that exist in some of these countries and locating what the actual process is for dealing with apostates. You have countries that it's very straightforward what they do. For example, Saudi Arabia or Iran, it's very straightforward. When you go to a country like Egypt, the cases for apostasy last a few years, and it honestly almost never ends with capital punishment. It almost always ends with loss of marriage and loss of inheritance. So learning, having that comparative analysis between the text of the country, as well as comparing that to the testimonies that exist of apostates there to figure out what actually exists. When it comes to a comparative analysis of the approaches to the issue, it's mostly been some broader subjects of research. One of the alternatives I proposed was conditionality of foreign aid, which I eventually dropped, but at the time I was able to use empirical examples of conditionality of foreign aid in the region to see the viability of that approach. That's the qualitative analysis that has existed so far, and that I've been able to jump into, collect, and distribute to others. Yes, Tyler.
I love the idea of the website. I guess my only concern, and I hope it's something you can kind of elaborate on, is in areas where they do have these apostasy laws, what is the concern if somebody, I guess, outs themselves?
Yes.
Almost? Are they exposed to violence at that point?
I think that, in general, the apostate communities are very good at knowing how to be safe with these, how to be safe with people's identities. So overall, I would not be surprised if the vast majority of people that we share their stories on these websites would be ex-Muslims who have left the country at this point. Ones that are very likely to be located in the United Kingdom or in the United States will probably be the most common. And then depending on the country in the Middle East, it would be, say, safer in Jordan to be out as an apostate, although there are some problems. And I would actually wager that if someone who was an apostate from, say, Pakistan or Iran tried to share their identity and their story online, we might not even let them, out of the idea that it would completely compromise their safety. Chidima? Mhm. 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 Yeah. So I guess when it comes to the goal now, the goal now for how to go through that process isn't so much to have people start tolerating apostasy, but more make sure that these people are safe to begin with. And that can be a very large step. For example, when I brought up the example of Tunisia, I am very interested to see whether or not the extrajudicial punishments of apostates in that country will decrease. Because if it does, then that means that maybe for now we can just focus on hopefully abolishing the laws, and maybe then that'll create a domino effect in order to slowly decrease that sentiment towards apostates. There's also there's a lot of time involved. One of the alternatives that actually I was opened up to through my mentor and his colleagues was the idea of sort of promoting Islamic law scholars in these countries who are saying that apostasy should not be capital offense. So Pakistan, for example, does not have an apostasy law. It has a blasphemy law that it uses sometimes as an apostasy law, but the reason it doesn't have that law to begin with is because there are several local religious leaders in the country that have said that apostasy itself is not a death sentence. It should be something that they agree with other punishments, but it should not be a death sentence. So hopefully finding a way to promote that slightly more tolerant ideology in any way possible would be great. And unfortunately, there isn't a leader of that minority opinion that's kind of rising up to like lead that charge. But making sure that we have our eye out for them so that when that does happen, we make sure that we're there to help. Ben. Yes. I expect it. Yeah. Mm. 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 No, that's a very good point. And that was something that I spoke with one of the colleagues of my mentor. And essentially, the one thing that I'm going to have to accept is that apostates who I wish that I could reach in some of these countries, the most important one is Saudi Arabia, which has immense protections on their internet to make sure that these websites are blocked. But I'm going to have to accept that I won't be able to reach all of them, if any of them, and I'm going to the only way the public campaign is going to have to spread there is through word of mouth, because they effectively can block my website. When it comes to helping new apostates, this website will certainly be more helpful for apostates in the United Kingdom or the United States, or even some countries like Jordan. It'll be more helpful there than it will be in Saudi Arabia, which is unfortunate, but as of right now, I have no solution to how to spread this message to a couple of the countries that you mentioned. Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. No, that's a very good question. Depending on the country, there are actually some countries that being an apostate can be worse as a woman, or it's easier to actually become an apostate. One very famous example, I'm spacing on the name right now, but she was in Afghanistan, and she was simply just accused of defaming the Quran. And there was unfortunately a massive riot that broke out, and she was unfortunately killed by this just massive group. So what you can find with women is that most often it's easier, like if a man had done that, he very likely would have still gone through a process. But at the exact same time, there are some countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran, I can't think of the last time that they actually carried out capital punishment against women. So when it comes to the society, women usually are treated worse. When it comes to the government, they usually give more time for the women to repent. In all of these countries, there's a 3-day policy where that once you have been convicted of being an apostate, you have 3 days to repent and come back to the religion. And the people that you see who are killed are either they refused to do it, or even if they did it, they weren't believed. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Yeah.